5 Live Formula One.
Hello and welcome to Qatar and welcome to the Losail International Circuit, where we are gearing up for the first and the only practice session of the weekend. Yes, it's another sprint weekend. We've got lots of action across all 3 days here in Doha, and it's a very busy paddock actually. Sometimes we don't expect that necessarily at these newer tracks, but actually quite a nice atmosphere in a totally rebuilt paddock. I'm sitting just taking in the sights and the sounds, and I have to say it has been a hot one here in Qatar today. We've got a track temperature of 42 degrees and the air temperature, it's 35 degrees, which I'm now becoming quite accustomed to. That is cool when it comes to the temperatures in Qatar. We've had temperatures over 40 degrees today, so as the sun starts to set, it is going to get cooler. But this session is going to be an interesting one. It is not representative, and yet it's the only one the teams and drivers have to prepare their cars for the rest of the weekend. So lots to look out for, and of course Max Verstappen hoping to take his third world title this weekend, and it looks like that could happen during the sprint race on Saturday. 177 points separate Max from his teammate and nearest rival Sergio Perez. And I think perhaps it's a little bit of an anticlimactic ending to win it in a sprint, but we will discuss that later on during this hour of practice, I am sure. And I'm Rosanna Tennant down in the paddock and pit lane, but in the commentary box this weekend we have our lead commentator Harry Benjamin, racing driver Alex Brundle, and the BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson. Harry Benjamin, it could all happen this weekend. Lots of things to look out for. Max Verstappen taking a third title. Do we think it's a little bit of a damp squib if he takes it after the sprint?
I mean, obviously I think we'd all love it if he did it on the Sunday. It's a bit cleaner, but the fact that this has been such a dominant year, probably the most dominant year in recent history, he was going to always claim the championship anyway. Whether he does it on a Saturday or Sunday, I don't think it makes a big difference. In fact, maybe get out of the way on Saturday and then we can enjoy just great racing on the Sunday. Fingers crossed.
Oh, I like your positivity and your optimism. Alex Brundle, great to have you on the team this weekend. Now, I've been raving about the new paddock. It looks very swish. The lights are going on. We've got a totally resurfaced track as well. And I've mentioned the temperatures. We've also got gusts of up to 60 kilometres per hour here, 30 to 40 kilometres an hour. Just normally, it's incredibly windy here. Some serious challenges for the drivers. And as I mentioned, just one session to prepare themselves. We've got choices on rear wing, we've got finding the limits, we've got drivers who've never raced it. How would you be approaching this one important session?
Well, certainly around the circuit, flags and trees, absolutely full of that wind that you're talking about. It's a very difficult session for teams and drivers to prepare themselves for the weekend, not least because of the differential in the conditions here. All relevant points-paying sessions will be held after nightfall. The only one of those sessions which might set the grid for the sprint shootout, will be held in similar conditions, but everything else in much, much cooler conditions later on into the evening. Not forgetting, of course, that the teams and drivers go into parc fermé conditions before the qualifying session that will happen later on this evening for the Grand Prix on Sunday. So they've got to set absolutely everything up in a tiny amount of time. The circuit here, the FIA are describing as a new circuit. Such is the resurfacing, such is the differentiation of the curb structures from what we've seen in the previous Grand Prix here in 2021 as well. So, as you correctly say, Rosanna, a vast amount for the teams to get through, but that's why they're sitting here in Formula One.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're going to be sitting in the garages waiting to get out pretty quickly. This is going to be a mega busy session. One might even say the trickiest session of the whole season. Just to tell you how hot it has been here, yesterday at midday, the track was 67 degrees. It's actually too hot to touch. I imagine you'd get close to frying an egg. Maybe not quite that much. But yes, the wind changing from corner to corner. So many challenges for the teams and drivers. And Andrew Benson, we've seen such reliability this year. We always talk about that when it comes to Max Verstappen and the Red Bull, but those curbs that Alex mentioned, we may see some damage. People could damage floors in this one session, which which then really puts you on the back foot for the rest of the weekend.
Yeah, well, last year, Rosanna, there were quite a few punctures in the race as a result of those curbs. Some of them, have been smoothed out for this year, along with the circuit being resurfaced and the new paddock, as you described it, and a media centre with overly keen air conditioning.
Yes, blankets being handed out, would you believe?
And we're seeing the effects of that wind at the moment. The cars are just coming out onto the track, and there's clouds of dust being thrown up already. So this is going to be a particularly difficult session for all the teams. You know, you've got to nail your setup in this 1 hour. That's tripped a number of teams up in the past in sprint races, particularly, for example, Red Bull. And if you think back to Brazil last year, it was the one race that sort of stopped their sweep at the end of last season and stopped this incredible record-breaking run being even longer than it has been. If you get your setup wrong, it can affect you for the whole weekend. So coming out onto a hot, dusty track is not what they would have wanted.
Absolutely, and speaking to Mercedes earlier on, they're expecting the track to ramp up and to evolve. Could be between 2 to 5 seconds even, the difference. Thought we were going to hear some radio there. Felt like we were right in the midst of it. And do you know what? I'm going to go and get in the midst of it. And Andrew mentioned Red Bull. Of course, last time we all chatted, we were in Japan, and that was where Red Bull took the Constructors' Championship. All eyes on Max Verstappen now, though, as he steps ever closer to taking his 3rd world title. Harry, it's up to you in the commentary box, and I'm going to head out to the pit lane. Wish me luck. I may melt.
Good luck, Rosanna. Good luck indeed. Yes, okay, well, welcome to free practice 1 then underway, and the green light is well and truly on at the end of the pit lane. And for those who wish to do a bit of a sinker, it's coming your way now. 58 minutes and 13, 12, 11, 10 seconds remain of this one and only practice session. Already the 2 Hasses, the 2 Alfa Romeos, the Alfa Tauris out there, and Max Verstappen in his Red Bull heads onto the track. Dust and sand already being kicked up. No support action here, no previous racing on this effectively brand new track that's been resurfaced.
Slow down, we have some issue. You want me to slow down? No push, okay. Don't push, not push. Do not push. Do not push, I'll let you know.
And that was Carlos Sainz there being told to not push. I think they got to the end of that one in the end. So Ferrari not entirely happy with something on Carlos Sainz's car as the sun glints off the scarlet red Ferrari as it does its opening gambit. Alex, one and only practice session, and to start with an issue is not ideal.
Okay, it's all okay from data now, so we can take your outlap.
Carlos Sainz continuing to make his way around the outlap with plumes of dust. Absolutely flying off the rear of the number 55 Ferrari. That could easily have been a little bit of an engine temperature issue for Sainz, just having to get everything up to temperature. Perhaps they've not quite got the presentation of the car right to the circuit. Whatever it is, they've managed to fail-safe that and get on their way around in these early laps of free practice 1. We are seeing one of the Haas cars, though, traipsing through the dust. That's Kevin Magnussen going very slowly in these early laps.
Yeah, and just as they cut through, it almost looks like it's water being kicked up off the track, but it is just sand and dust that is spraying off of it and coming off the back of the rear wing. It's a great angle of the vortices as it comes off the back of the rear wing on the Ferrari too. A
unique weekend for Formula One this weekend, Harry, because there are absolutely no support races here in Qatar. And we were talking about the development of this race circuit through the weekend.
My God, it's so slippery.
Okay, roger that.
The voice there of Max Verstappen giving you a bit of a feel for how the circuit is evolving in the early laps. But there are no support races this weekend. So we are going to see a slower cleaning, if not a slower evolution of the circuit than we do otherwise. And of course, it's a slightly different structure of the weekend. So those hours and hours and hours of practice we normally have are not going to be present. Even potentially slightly more reserved running as we go one lap at a time qualifying all the way through to the sprint race. Important to establish the structure of this weekend. We have this practice session and then the qualifying session a little bit later on, which is for the Grand Prix on Sunday. And then Saturday is its self-encapsulating day.
Yeah, my dad would do it quick in this condition. Roger that.
Carlos Sainz Jr., of course, referring to World Rally Champion Carlos Sainz Sr. As in the conditions. But yeah, we have a self-encapsulating Saturday with the sprint shootout in the morning, the qualifying session for the sprint in the afternoon.
Yeah, that is how it all works. So Saturday is effectively just a sprint Saturday. So one practice session only on a incredibly slippery track before we get into Grand Prix qualifying a little later today. And you can hear that from 6 o'clock on the BBC Sport website app and on BBC 5 Sport Extra. Let's head down to the pits, shall we? Where Rosanna Tennant has found herself outside of Williams, I believe.
Yes, absolutely. Outside Williams, both drivers still in. It doesn't look like there's a problem. I think they are just waiting for the track to clean up maybe a little bit. But speaking to some of the performance engineers coming into this session, they were saying people are going to be out straight away. You cannot afford to waste any time. And you might think we have other races, don't we, where we're in hot conditions during maybe an FP1 session or even an FP3 session. And people do tend to be a little bit lackadaisical heading out. But this one is so important because of the sprint weekend that you need to be out there. So Williams just sitting pretty at the moment with 53 and 54 seconds on the clock. Hopefully they'll be out quite soon. But just to paint the picture, I was worried I was going to melt, Harry, down in the pit lane. But actually we're in quite a bit of shade and the sun is just between the sort of roof part of the main grandstand on the start-finish straight and the seating area. So in probably a few minutes' time, that will duck below the seating part, and then we will have no sunlight heading over to the pit lane, which will make it even more agreeable, but still very breezy in the pit lane.
I can't see anything. I don't know why, but the sun makes you not see anything.
Okay, understood.
And that's Max Verstappen. And we had just seen an onboard shot where the sun is starting to set in the sky, and then that light is being reflected as we're seeing it off the onboard camera. But that is going into their helmets. But Alex, more often than not, as we see Oscar Piastri head into the braking zone for turn one and the sun glints off of his visor, they have special visors to handle these kind of conditions.
Yeah, you do. The helmet manufacturers have all sorts of different trickery to help you deal with conditions, but eventually when the sun is very low in the sky and getting in your eyes, there's not a whole lot you can put in front of the eye to actually deal with that. The red Ferrari of Charles Leclerc heading wide between turns 4 and 5 there with a bit of oversteer. We can see as well the Mercedes of George Russell sparking along that front straight as they try to minimise the ride. So it's interesting to see how many different approaches there are to this early session, albeit not the most representative running for teams and drivers, as the orange glow of that low sun glances off the tarmac through the middle sector.
Yeah, a couple of opening lap times so far. George Russell with a 1:32.955 on the hard compound of tyre. His teammate Lewis Hamilton is down in 7th at the moment, but is coming round to finish off a lap. Max Verstappen going fastest of anybody at the moment. A mix of hard and medium compound tyres. Let's just see what Lewis Hamilton has got over the line as he comes across DRS open, and he goes second fastest. So it's Mercedes 1-2 in these early stages, but as we've mentioned, difficult conditions, almost like an ice rink out there, such as the slipperiness of this track with a brand new surface. This is the sound of Max Verstappen on his flying lap as he heads up through the gears. DRS open, the rear wing flap at the rear of the car opens, and he goes second fastest, a 1:32.2, just under 3/10 off. And this weekend, Max Verstappen can become a 3-time world champion in Formula One, and if all goes well, we expect him to take that on Saturday at the end of the sprint, because all he needs is 3 points to take the championship title. But it's Formula One, you can never say never, but it's pretty inevitable.
Now, George Russell, Harry, has made an absolutely flying start to this session. He's 8 tenths quicker than Max Verstappen, who's now third with Pierre Gasly's AlphaTauri. Verstappen's just gone off, by the way, but to no harm to his Red Bull by the looks of it. Although you've got to be careful with these ground effect cars, it might have damaged his floor, you never know. But Russell, it almost looks like he's got low fuel in and he's practicing for qualifying already. And one of the reasons you might do that, first of all, you're going to have to be quite confident in your car and that you've got the setup right as you feel it on the first lap. But qualifying's so important around this track. It's a high-speed track. Overtaking is not easy. So maybe Russell's taking that approach to see, to maximise his qualifying setup time. What do you think, Alex?
Still very much on the hard tyre, though, most of the teams and drivers at the moment, and in the early stages. He did look a good deal lower than everybody else. The only car that I've seen so far chucking the sparks out of those skid blocks on a more qualifying type of attitude as he went down the main straight. I do wonder how many tenths of a second Verstappen dumped when he made his way off the circuit, as you were describing a few moments ago. But early stages yet in FP1. We talked about a Grand Prix weekend with one practice. I'm going to go ahead and say a Grand Prix weekend with no practice, because this session,
what are they getting out of it?
What are they really getting out of this? The way the circuit appears, the amount of dust, it's almost hard to describe in a believable manner for those who may have watched Formula One sessions in the past, just how dirty the track surface looks and how much dirt there is coming out of the back of the car as we hear Lando Norris going wide.
I hit one of the polystyrene boards with the front wing.
Okay, understood. We saw it on the video.
Yeah, it was the 150-metre board, Lando, blown to smithereens, and polystyrene flying everywhere. The car undamaged. He'll be pleased to hear, at least visibly, that Lando Norris there just finding the limits of this track. Hashtag BBC F1. Kaylee said, I was late to free practice, sorry. Who's in with Hazard? Well, it's racing driver extraordinaire, sports car champion Alex Brundle alongside me, and the BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson is here, and down in the pits, it's Rosanna Tennant.
Do I get to call you Hazard forever now? That'd be great. Let's keep going with that one. Lewis Hamilton fastest across the line as the circuit continues to improve down into sector 1, and Mercedes strong here. Lewis Hamilton, the winner of the inaugural race here back in 2021, and a good record here for Mercedes. It reads 1 start, 1 pole and 1 win.
Yeah, no, it's very early days, as you said, wisely, Alex. But it's interesting that the Mercedes are 1 and 2 at the moment, because you wouldn't expect Mercedes to be quick around this track. That car's been good at lower speed circuits with more short duration, lower speed corners. We've seen Verstappen go off again. He just got a bit of a wobble on through a double right-hander. And the long, fast corners like you have in Qatar, it do not suit the Mercedes. But one thing that's worth bearing in mind about that is that this has been resurfaced, this track surface, so it should be very smooth. And that could help Mercedes, because one of the issues that they have is if they've got bumps and so on, it triggers problems with their car. A smoother track might enable them to get it into the setup window more easily.
I may propose a theory as well that the low grip nature of the circuit surface as it is flattering the Mercedes mechanical prowess, and the lower terminal speed because of the slow corner exit might be saving them in terms of drag a little bit. But certainly, yeah, they really do not like those bumps, do they? It's been a feature throughout the whole year, as you correctly say.
Yeah, and some of these curves here being described as absolute floor killers as well. So as Fernando Alonso, though, finds the speed and goes fastest in his Aston Martin, a 1:35. Still no movements. Well, actually, I believe they've just come onto their outlap. The 2 Williams cars, Rosanna.
Absolutely, yeah, they are out on track now, and as I was watching the timer tick down for this FP1 session, Alex Albon was released absolutely on the point of 48 minutes remaining, so missing a 5th of practice already. His teammate Logan Sargent 30 seconds behind him, and the team telling me absolutely fine, all part of the run plan, as we see Carlos Sainz also running wide out there on the track and kicking up so much dust. And do you know what, Harry, it's exactly the same in the pit lane. When the drivers come in, as they head off back into the fast lane of the pit lane, the dust flies up. So quite glad I'm wearing sunglasses, because I think it would be getting in my eyes a little bit. And I just watched Liam Lawson come in and out, still in the AlphaTauri car for this weekend. Daniel Ricciardo had a go in the Red Bull Sim earlier this week, but thought he was around 80 to 90% there in terms of his recovery from that broken hand he sustained back in Zandvoort, which feels so long ago now. But taking the safer route and deciding not to take part in this weekend here in Qatar, And of course, with just one practice session, if he jumped in the car and then struggled, it would have really put Liam Lawson on the back foot, who would have had to get right in there for qualifying. So Liam Lawson's still in for this weekend, and we know he's been doing a good job in that seat alongside Yuki Tsunoda.
Yeah, a cold FaceTime call from Daniel Ricciardo was how he found out about the news. But Liam Lawson gets another outing, and we get to see what the Kiwi driver has got. I tell you what, the drivers aren't enjoying the polystyrene boards around here. We've already had a 150-metre board taken out by Lando Norris. Max Verstappen and his Red Bull just a few moments ago clipped, and I think also did destroy our 100-metre board. So they're going to have to be a little bit careful there. They're not going to know where to brake otherwise, Alex.
Certainly so. Low grip out there. We've seen a couple of victims already of these reprofiled curbs, which are on the exit of what seemingly the majority of the corners now. It did used to be those two-stage, if you can imagine, sort of a first stage lower curb and then a second slightly more aggressively serrated section of curb here. The reason I believe they've been taken away is because with a very high stress tarmac surface and layout here in Qatar, they were basically finishing the left front tyre off. Drivers would put the tyre in a very vulnerable situation with a long, fast right-hand corner just to arrive to a two-tier serrated curb, and that's what would finish the sidewall of the tyre off. Now they've been changed to a single curve, a single wedge of cheese, if you like, out towards the exit of the circuit. But that, of course, potentially causes more damage to the floor surface or more damage to the underside of the cars. We've already seen several drivers skating along those curves, which could be the reason those polystyrene boards are being wiped out, Harry.
Yeah, they don't want to face the damage that could be done by the curb, so they'd rather take the polystyrene way out. And I think some of the curves we're hearing between 3 and 5 centimetres is the drop-off behind the edge of the curb, as Esteban Ocon on the Alpine is the sound you're hearing, just having a little bit of a moment coming through the long right-hander around turns 12, 13 and 14, has to run wide and then rejoins on the track as Max Verstappen goes fastest on the hard compound of tyre, a 1:29.883, less than a tenth between himself and George Russell. Alonso is third, Hamilton signs the top 5, Norris, Leclerc, Piastri, Hülkenberg, Perez the top 10, Bottas, Stroll, Tsunoda, Gasly, Magnussen the top 15. Joe, Albon, Lawson, Ocon and Sargent, the 20 drivers out on track. 2 currently in the pits, though. It's Pierre Gasly in the Alpine and Kevin Magnussen in his Haas, on a weekend where Max Verstappen can claim the title. But although that may well be sewn up with Max Verstappen's 177-point advantage at the top above his teammate Sergio Perez, it's getting quite tight and tasty further down the field, though. Lewis Hamilton in third, 190 points to his name, 16 ahead of Fernando Alonso. Then comes Carlos Sainz, Leclerc, Norris, Russell, Piastri and Stroll, the top 10. And in the constructors, Red Bull having already clinched the title with 623 points now over Mercedes, who have 305. Only 20 between themselves and Ferrari. Then come Aston Martin, and McLaren are feeling quite bullish about overhauling their 50-point deficit to Aston Martin. It's 49 points to be precise. Then come Alpine, Williams, Haas, Alfa Romeo and AlphaTauri, with mere points separating the back end of the field. So, Alex, although we can talk and we will talk about how utterly dominant and bulletproof and consistent Max Verstappen and Red Bull has been, and although that might come as a bit of a detriment to the racing and I dare say the B word, boring, there's still lots of stories to be decided.
Much verbal sparring this week. Firstly, between Lewis Hamilton, who says I'm still after Sergio Perez is second in the championship, and then between Lando Norris and Fernando Alonso over McLaren potentially catching Aston Martin in the Constructors' World Championship after they've had such a strong run of form. This should be another circuit which suits the nature of that McLaren, which throughout the whole season has been, well, not throughout the whole season, since they brought that sequence of upgrades in Austria, has been so strong in the high-speed corners, especially the sequential high-speed corners. So there's a lot of intrigue going on at the moment, and a lot of firstly accolade to be taken out of the rest of this season, but secondly money and funding associated to those Constructors' Championship battles, which, although we live in a cost cap era of Formula One, is still very much relevant for these operating businesses. So plenty to fight for behind Max Verstappen's 400 square points at the front of the series, he could well be in a position in the short order of having double the points of any other driver in the championship, as the flip side of that intrigue argument. So yeah, it's been somewhat of a whitewash, hasn't it?
He's also winning the Constructors' Championship on his own, which is quite an impressive stat. Christian Horner in Japan was trying to claim that Sergio Perez was as well, but he's completely wrong with his maths on that one, I'm afraid. Just by the way, on the stats of the championship, I've seen some dodgy numbers flying around. Formula One put up a graphic earlier saying Verstappen had to score 3 points in the sprint. No, he doesn't. He only has to not lose 6 to Perez. He doesn't have to score any at all, as long as Perez doesn't outscore him by 6 or more.
Well, that's to seal it in the sprint. He can't. If he retires from the sprint and he doesn't score any points, it will go to the Grand Prix as long as Sergio Perez scores points.
No,
I think that's correct,
because he has to outscore him by 6 points or more.
So Perez has to finish third or higher in the sprint.
Even if Verstappen retires, yeah.
Even if Verstappen retires. Yeah. Okay, well those are the permutations then. But the likelihood of it will be in the sprint, because for his performance alone, regardless if you want to separate him as a constructor as well, it's the consistency and the bulletproofness. He hasn't had any worries or issues reliability-wise either.
Well, I think it was interesting yesterday. The drivers were almost lining up to praise him. You know, Alonso, Hamilton, Norris, and I'm sure if all the other drivers had been asked, they'd have said something similar. Flawless was the word some people used. Brilliant was some others, and it's the peak, it's the level of consistency at such a high level that has impressed everybody. As Alonso was saying yesterday in the press conference, you know, he didn't put it this way, but I'll put it this way. It's easy to sort of diminish Verstappen's achievement because it seemed so mundane, it seemed so expected, but to perform at that level so often in varying weather conditions, it's rained so much through the summer, for example, in some of the European races, in Canada as well. He's made no mistakes. He's been absolutely unbelievable. And not only, you know, when you add that level of consistency to someone whose talent as well is as high as Verstappen's is, that's when you become unbeatable. And let's not forget, Sergio Perez has the same car. 8 times Verstappen's won. He's not even been second. You know, so he's been in a season of remarkable excellence from Verstappen.
And that hasn't gone unnoticed by the other drivers either. I think Lewis Hamilton was saying as well in the build-up to this weekend, although Max Verstappen hasn't really had to fight hard to defend his title, he's driven flawlessly, and there's performing to what your car can do and then going beyond as a driver, which I think is something he has absolutely demonstrated. He's currently second fastest though. Leclerc has the advantage at the moment with 37 minutes remaining. Let's head down to Rosanna.
Yeah, absolutely. You can head down to me in the pit lane. Getting a little busier now. It was pretty quiet to start with, apart from those 2 Williams drivers, Alex Albon and Logan Sargent. They headed out on track, and now quite a lot of other drivers have headed back down. I'm just looking at Lando Norris in the garage being checked over by the McLaren mechanics. And McLaren were a team that we were expecting to go well this weekend, obviously off the back of that double podium in Japan. Oscar Piastri, the Australian rookie, taking his first ever podium in F1 in such a mature way, and his reaction was so mature as well, sort of going over what he could have done better in his racecraft as well. And just thinking ahead to later on this afternoon, guys, we're seeing these cars running wide out there, the drivers struggling to keep the car where it needs to be. Dare I mention it? Should I whisper it? Track limits? Could this be an issue in qualifying with people having laps deleted later on today?
Alex?
Yeah, it certainly could. It really, really could. And Alex Albon, before the weekend began, suggested as much in the pen and in the press conference that track limits could definitely be a factor today, depending on how the curbs treated the drivers. I also do think this wind, which is a headwind heading down the 1 kilometre front straight we have here in Qatar, could be a factor as well, which of course is then a tailwind all the way through the difficult middle sector and the fast final sector. So we are going to see mistakes. We have seen mistakes all the way through this first practice session.
And when we talk about wind, Harry, you just got to sort of cherry pick almost the Williams drivers, because of course their car is uber sensitive to the wind, and as I mentioned earlier on at the beginning of the programme, the wind changes from corner to corner here, and Alex Albon actually already on the radio saying his seat feels very hot, so another challenge for their team to get on top of. But Alex Rundle, I mean, if your seat's hot in Qatar, I kind of expect that, but how do you differentiate?
Oh, that didn't sound good. What happened to the engine? We'll come back to you.
That's Leclerc then peeling into the pits behind his teammate, and then the engine sort of conking out. We'll come back to you, is what the team replied with. Not the most confidence-inspiring thing.
Well, Ferrari were having issues at the start of this session. I believe it was with the other car, though, with Carlos Sainz. They asked him to not push in the early laps. So we're a lot of engine issues here. It is a high full throttle percentage here. Most teams and drivers already have. In fact, I'm pretty sure everyone has their 3 power units already in circulation. So they're 3 ICE units. So that could easily be a penalty if it is the loss of an ICE unit for an internal combustion engine unit for Charles Leclerc. So worrying times. It's a tough, hard weekend for the engine. High full throttle percentage and a lot of temperature as well. So we'll see what goes on with that one.
We were on hot seat chat with Albon. I'm not the most comfortable of rides.
Tends to be electrical.
Yeah.
There are a lot of electrical boxes and various bits of technology that sit around the driver's safety cell. Don't have fuel tank issues that much. That's the only other thing which is in that kind of zone. Don't tend to have fuel tank issues that much anymore. So is very likely to be high resistance in an electrical element of the car which sits around the driver's seat for Albon.
Well, Albon currently down in 15th spot. He's on an outlap, and his teammate Logan Sargent also out there. He's currently 17th at the moment, Rosanna, the 2 Williams.
Yeah, Alex Albon's just come back into the pits, and the team telling me that actually his seat's fine. So maybe just a momentary hot bum for Alex Albon, and it's all passed. And his teammate there, that's the sound of Logan Sargent heading back down to the Williams garage right at the other end of where I'm standing in the pit lane. I'm outside Charles Leclerc's garage just watching the mechanics, having a little look at the Ferrari, and I'm going to try and investigate what's going on there and whether there is a sinister problem afoot for the guys in red. But whilst I mentioned Logan Sargent, of course, a bit of pressure on his shoulders still the chatter in the paddock about will he or won't he have a seat next year. And I asked him yesterday, can he pinpoint where all these mistakes are happening? Is there a sort of similar moment or a feeling that he gets when all these mistakes happen? And I think he just needs a clean weekend at the moment, because he couldn't pinpoint those moments, but he also told me he doesn't listen to all the chatter. So I'm a bit devastated he doesn't listen to our Checkered Flag podcast. That probably means...
Well, he's got to listen to some chatter, because his team principal, James Vowles, has been chattering quite positively about him, Alex.
I had a long chat with his engineer, Guy Sanjago, in Singapore. Actually, it was in Japan, thinking about it. And they're actually a lot more impressed with him than even within the team. I mean, you always need to demonstrate this kind of strong front outside the team. You support both drivers until otherwise told, basically, and that's the way it's always been. But they really feel that another year for him is going to yield much better results. The rookie problem is the quote that I would give you. He seems to get his head around a weekend just in time to leave the circuit and head on to the next one. The response to that, though, surely has got to be that Formula One's not a finishing school. And you've got to be on it from the moment you arrive. This is the pinnacle of motorsport, not a learning experience. I think they definitely want to keep Logan Sargent, but one thing that's abundantly clear is the performance level has to increase, Andrew.
Yeah, I spoke to James Vowles in Japan, actually, and I won't tell you everything he told me, because some of it was private, but he did say he wasn't going to make a decision until the end of the year. I get the feeling, Alex, you're right. In an ideal world, they would keep him, because they have seen flashes of potential from him. The problem is he's crashing too much, and the flashes of potential aren't being joined up into consecutive weekends, and he needs to start proving that he can do that, because you're absolutely right. He's already demonstrated, unfortunately for Logan Sargent's future, I would say, that he's not going to be an A-level driver. If you're going to be really good, you come in, bang, you're on the level straight away. Everyone who's quick and has lasted a long time in Formula 1, Alonso, Leclerc, Verstappen, Russell, Hamilton, they've all come in and gone, bang, we're here, we're mega, and you can see it. If you don't do that, you're never going to get to that level, basically. That doesn't mean you can't have a decent Formula 1 career, and I think Logan Sargent looks like he's someone who's got the talent to go on to have a decent Formula 1 career if he can start stringing weekends together and stop making the mistakes.
There was a moment at the end of his Formula 2 career when he needed, if you recall, he needed to get the super license points to make it through to the next stage. And I remember watching him pound round Abu Dhabi in a Formula 2 car, thinking, and some of the communications on the radio, thinking that sounds like a race car driver who's under a tremendous amount of pressure. And not only that, he's showing it. And the way that weekend played out for me demonstrated the key challenge for Logan Sargent, which is getting his head around the grandeur of the level of motorsport that he's now at. And maybe coming back for a second year, if he gets a second year, will allow him just to calm in the mind and focus on what he needs to do. The problem he's got are, and Liam Lawson's not going to be one of them, he's already been told he's in a reserve seat at AlphaTauri for next year, but there are several good drivers with potential floating around who it's easy to believe would do a better job in that Williams.
There absolutely are. One of them is Oliver Behrman, who's just been confirmed to get a couple of free practice 1 sessions with the Haas team in Mexico and in Abu Dhabi. The 18-year-old F2 front runner, backed by Ferrari, British racer. But he's not the only one. There's a whole stack of talent in that F2 field. And actually, it does perhaps segue quite nicely in the build-up to this week. Andretti have passed the FIA's tests. Will we get an 11th team? Well, now it's over to Formula 1 management to decide. And that obviously then, I'm going to put my hand up and go, yes, I absolutely want them. 2 more seats on the grid, 2 more opportunities for drivers, not to mention what a team brings to Formula 1 in terms of job opportunities and fan entertainment.
Well, in terms of hoops to jump through, they've obviously got the regulatory one, which is the FIA. And I would kind of describe that as a truck tyre. That's the big hoop. The hoop they've now got to jump through is sort of the eye of a needle, which is the business hoop, and convincing the other teams and convincing the championship from a commercial perspective that's what they want. Do I have any insight to offer into what's going to get that job done? That's going to happen in private within all of the teams. There are several drivers who
You're not included in those meetings.
Funnily enough, my invite must have been lost in the post. But there are several drivers who have come out in support, but most of the teams, apart from McLaren, have come out negatively in the media with regards to that. But it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, so McLaren haven't come out negatively in the media. In fact, Zach Brown...
positively, they are the only positively.
He actually signed a letter to say he approved Andretti's entry. Actually, behind the scenes, he doesn't approve it. None of the teams want them in. And actually, Formula 1 don't want them in either.
And why is that?
It's a franchise model. They've got 10 teams. They're not convinced that Andretti will add anything to the championship. I'm not sure I understand why. You know, on the face of it, you know, Mario Andretti, it's not Mario Andretti's team, it's his son Michael Andretti's team. And Mario's the guy, he's the reason why the Andretti name is so iconic in Formula 1. Michael was a great IndyCar driver, but his Formula 1 career lasted less than 1 season in 1993 when he came up against Ayrton Senna at McLaren and tried to do that by commuting from Pennsylvania, which didn't go very well. Your dad had a front row seat watching that, of course, Alex. And they've got backing from General Motors, and they're one of the most iconic car brands in the world in Cadillac. So on the face of it, it ticks a lot of boxes. But for some reason, Formula 1, they're not feeling it. They don't see that they need them. And I think this has created quite a lot of tension behind the scenes between F1 and the FIA. Mohammed Ben Sulayem, the FIA president, he created this new teams process. He didn't have to, but he opened it out. So for him to put out a statement saying, "Oh well, you know, we had this rigorous process and we couldn't not accept them if they ticked all the boxes in our process. Well, yeah, but you set the process up. You didn't have to. The Formula 1 didn't want him to. And so he's put Formula 1 in a slightly difficult position. It's going to be interesting to see how they get themselves out of it, because I think the problem is that if Formula 1 turn round and say, no, you can't come in, having been accepted by the FIA, legal action will almost certainly follow, and this could drag on for a long time. I think the teams themselves, they see it as diminishing their value. It's not their decision, of course, it's Formula 1's decision, but they are minded to side with the teams. They're the ones who've invested all this money in the sport over all this time, and they feel that they should be on their side and not on the FIA's.
I think that's probably about the size of it. You know, you've got an ever-growing pie. Formula 1 has as much interest as it's ever had. Formula 1 has as much fan engagement as it's ever had. And there's this consensus feeling that the teams and the organisation have built this, and it needs to be a pretty compelling piece of a pretty compelling pitch for someone else to join the party at this stage. Should probably check back in with a session where Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin, in somewhat of a turn of form from the early laps, has found himself in P1 with the two Ferraris now behind Sainz, the first of the leading runners to venture onto the medium tyre.
Yeah, and this is the sound of Oscar Piastri in the McLaren, fresh off of his podium in Japan, puts that McLaren up into fourth spot on the hard compound tyre. Verstappen, Gasly, Russell, Norris, Ocon and Stroll, the top 10. Hamilton, Perez, then comes Hülkenberg, Tsunoda, Bottas, the top 15. Albon, Lawson, Sargent, Joe and Magnussen, the 20 drivers in the field. And Max Verstappen has just had a little bit of a moment there, getting onto the curb and nearly going round in the full 360. Managed to hold it, went off the track, rejoined and nearly went into the side of the Haas of Nico Hülkenberg. And this is the sound of that Haas. Just about manages to find a piece of track for the both of them. But a bit of a scary moment there for Verstappen.
I don't think he's that comfortable in his car in this session, Max Verstappen. They're going to have their work cut out in the gap between this and qualifying, because as Alex was saying earlier, that's it. When you go into qualifying, that's your setup for the weekend. And you can't really do big setup changes during this session. They've got to play with it. But it's not like Max Verstappen to have this many offs, even if it's dusty. In fact, I would say he's had more offs than anybody else, which just goes to show how much he's struggling. So something's not gone right with that Red Bull setup so far this weekend.
No, well, Verstappen down in 5th at the moment, and Perez down in 12th as well. Lando Norris in the McLaren is going well, or he was going well in the first sector, lost a big chunk of time in the middle sector. But we can head down to the pits now and get an update from Rosanna.
We've just had a practice pit stop. Haven't seen many of them so far in this session. Of course, the team's prioritising track time, so a lot of the drivers have just been coming in and going on again, or a quick visit into the actual garage and out. But a practice pit stop for Alpine on Esteban Ocon's car. He's now in the garage. Alex Albon coming back into the pits now on that medium tyre and talking with his engineer on the radio about the brakes, hoping that they were going to cool down. So another challenge for Williams this weekend, and of course a challenge for all the drivers and teams this weekend, keeping on top of those brakes. So I think it's all starting to get a little busier in the pit lane. We've had some more action out on track in terms of people running wide. Nico Hülkenberg running wide, telling the team to check his front wing for damage. So hopefully he hasn't picked up any damage as we get to 22 minutes left on the clock. And George Russell just ran over a little bit of debris or a little bit of bodywork out on track. So I'm going to head up to the Mercedes garage and check in with them and see if it's all okay.
Thanks, Rosanna. And, well, talk of Leclerc, he is out on track, but he's just run out wide, rejoined, kicked up a bit of dust for good measure, but no harm done on that Ferrari. But it is tricky out there. That some of the sand and the dust has been dispelled as they've done more running, but as soon as you dip a wheel offline, it's slippy, it's dusty, it's tricky.
Harry, I think that's the second consecutive lap Leclerc's had an off, because I saw him, he'd gone green in the first sector on the previous lap, his first lap on the mediums. Then he backed off. He's just started another lap then, gone off. I don't know he went off before, but he definitely must have made a mistake. He's obviously made another mistake that we've just seen on telly. So it just goes to show the conditions are difficult still. Yeah,
good to see him back out running though after that radio message earlier on in the session where he appeared to have some sort of issue with the engine. So obviously they've managed to resolve that down in the Ferrari garage. You're hearing Oscar Piastri after his maiden podium in Formula 1 last time out, making his way through the final sector and out onto the 1 kilometre front straight. A decent weekend so far, and Piastri will go fastest in the McLaren as the circuit continues to improve. There's only a minor plume of dust now when drivers go off.
From major to minor.
Rather than a wake that we had early on in the session, but a nice lap then for Oscar Piastri. And I agree with you, coming back to Max Verstappen, Andrew. He's sitting, what is it, a decent way away from the pace, and I do wonder if that pointy Red Bull, mechanically pointy Red Bull, is even a little bit too pointy for Max with the conditions as they are now, having very much of a quiet session, aren't they, with Verstappen only in 5th position, Sergio Perez down in 12th, so their typical gap is being respected, but not their typical positioning.
Yes, yeah, as you say, both on the hard tyre as well. Piastri, though, smiling currently with 90 minutes and 52 seconds on the clock, is fastest in this one and only free practice session before we then head straight into qualifying for Sunday's Grand Prix, because it's a sprint weekend. That means Saturday becomes a bit of a standalone event, really, with the sprint shootout followed by the sprint race. It's sprint Saturday, and then Sunday it's business as usual for a Grand Prix. But it just feels like a harder task this weekend. As we've mentioned, the track is slippery. It's basically a brand new surface, as they've redone the pit buildings as well. That is brand new. It is the same track layout, but they're labeling it a brand new track. Also, the sun is now getting lower and lower in the sky. The temperature starts to drop a little bit as well. So this is an unrepresentative session. But how do they get on board with that?
Who's labelling it a brand new track?
FIA.
It's not a brand new track. It's just got a new surface on it.
In the race director's notes,
really,
it says new track.
Come on.
I know. It's certainly a new surface, and I do wonder if Pirelli, because I expected to see the hardest 3 compounds here, which are now the Silverstone tyre, the C0, the C1 and the C2, and we've got the C1, C2 and C3. They're up, of course, the harder, more resilient end of the compound range, but they are not the hardest. I do wonder if Pirelli know something we don't about the grip levels afforded on this new circuit surface, because they...
I think there's a joke to be made there, isn't there, about what Pirelli knows anyway.
Far be it from me to redesign the
the wind picked up. We'll come back to you.
That's Leclerc asking that as the wind picked up, and actually just had another moment running off wide, and there was a tiny bit of looked a bit like carbon fibre. It was certainly red that flicked off the Ferrari when he did so as well, and Lance Stroll and the Aston Martin deciding to run over those curves with a huge drop at the end of them, the serrated edge, and gets the sparks flying from underneath of that Aston Martin. Stroll currently down in 11th. It's a McLaren 1-2 though at the moment. Piastri and Norris first and second. 17 minutes and 40 seconds left of practice 1. Rosanna's in the pits.
Yeah, it's now looking a bit more like we predicted, with McLaren on top at the moment. Of course, we thought they'd be challenging Red Bull. Getting a little more hectic in the pits as the McLaren and an Aston Martin come in, and I'm just watching George Russell in the Mercedes being pushed back on those hard tyres, and we saw him run over a little bit of debris, didn't we? And I think there was a worry that he might have picked up some damage, but the team saying that nothing reported, team hasn't seen anything, but he ran wide at turn 5, asked the team to check for any floor damage, but still no issues seen on the data, so all okay.
Thank you very much, Rosanna.
Alex, I guess the point you were trying to make about the tyres was that with the new surface, the track's going to be quite a lot faster this year, and that's why they brought the harder end of the compound range.
No, I was expecting to see one step still harder to the C0 because of the extremely high energy tarmac and the high energy circuit layout. And I do wonder if they have viewed this circuit, seen the lower grip resurfacing, and actually stepped one compound softer, in fact, to try to remedy that. Because you can imagine on this dusty circuit surface, if they brought the C0, they'd be really struggling at this stage.
Yeah, well, that tyre wasn't very popular last year, was it? Because it was too hard, basically, for anywhere. So I'm not that surprised they haven't brought that, but it's interesting. So the surface is a lower grip surface than normal that they've used on this?
I think, well, for the appearance of FP1, it certainly looks to be a lower grip surface even than we had at the same stage in 2021 when we ran. So it could just be the dirt on the circuit surface. I mean, this circuit is very seldom used, and when it is used, by the way, it's often used for bikes. Very, very big motorcycle layout, and originally a motorcycle layout. Tendency of those long, fast, sweeping, constant radius corners is very much conducive to motorcycle racing, but could be that. But it does seem like the circuit is lacking just a little bit of grip. As you say, and you remind me, this C1 was sort of slotted in the middle, wasn't it, to give the teams a bit more of a chance on a layout like this.
Charles Leclerc has found some decent pace in that Ferrari on the medium compound tyre. He has gone to the top, a 1:28.104, 2 tenths clear, over 2.5 tenths clear of Oscar Piastri.
Yeah, he's finally managed to put a lap together on those tyres, hasn't he, after going off a few times. And that's obviously that comment that we heard from him on the radio. The wind, has the wind picked up? That's obviously what he thought was the explanation for why he was making that many mistakes when he was first trying on these tyres.
Yeah, well, you can the flags that fly high on the pit wall and the paddock buildings are very much showcasing the speed of the wind as Leclerc crosses the line and then cools down. His teammate, though, very much out there and trying to find some time on the medium compounded tyre as well. Sainz down in 5th at the moment. He's found a bit of time in the middle sector as he comes round the final corner. Has to have a couple of bites at the cherry into the right-hander, up through the gears, 7th gear across the line, and he does improve his time, but he still stays down in 5th. He's 7 tenths off his teammate Leclerc. And I suppose at one point, Alex, since the summer break, it looked like the competitive nature had shifted within Ferrari, and Sainz had suddenly started to come to the front a little bit more than Leclerc. But a new flaw came in Japan, and now it seems to have gone back. Leclerc, the better of him in Japan, and so far, I know we've only had one pretty tough practice one session to get an idea of competitiveness, but Leclerc's fastest, Sainz 7 tenths off.
Leclerc didn't like the first set of upgrades they brought, said it made the car push on and then oversteer through the exit of the corner. There are several drivers in the field, Verstappen's one of them, and Charles Leclerc's another one of them, who really like the car to sort of think its way in. You can almost look into the corner and it rotates on sight, whereas there are other drivers who need that little bit of understeer and are happy to provoke the front of the car into the corner. But he seems to have got his head around it. Maybe it was the new floor in Japan. I think it's more likely to be the 2 sequential layouts we've had, which are generally sweeping in nature and don't have as many of those squared off kind of street circuit corners, I'd call them, which are less conducive to that difficult kind of balance, that push-loose balance, and are more conducive to the type of car and the type of driving that Charles Leclerc is really at home with. So I think it could be a layout thing, but certainly over the last 2 Grand Prix since Singapore, Leclerc's been the one who's back on top.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Leclerc goes when Formula 1 goes back to another track like that, because he's normally so strong at those sorts of circuits. Look how quick he is at Baku, for example, which is all right-angle corners. But what he said in Japan was that the problem he's been having is that the Ferrari's fundamentally unpredictable, inconsistent in corners. Earlier in the season, they didn't know what it was going to do from corner to corner. And to tame that, to calm that down, they had to dial some understeer into the setup. And as you were saying, Alex, Leclerc hates understeer. And so he was finding it difficult to drive the car in that setup. Now, the floor, they've been trying to tame the instability all through the season. And that floor upgrade that came in Japan allowed Leclerc to move back a little bit more towards the kind of setup that he likes. So I don't think it was a coincidence that he was suddenly quicker than Sainz again in Suzuka. And it's obviously the same car here in Qatar. There's only 3 teams who've brought upgrades. So given that he found that in Suzuka at a track with long high-speed corners, it's no surprise that it looks like he's continuing that form into another track with long high-speed corners.
It's a podcast of its own, really, but this is the fundamental switchover with the current spec of Formula One car. So if you have a floor which works in a narrow window, you can actually generate a higher peak of downforce, which appears to be what Red Bull have managed to do while still giving the car to Verstappen. If you have a car which works in a wide, so you're always operating in a compromise between the width of ride height window that the floor works in and the total peak of downforce it's able to produce. So they're just moving that compromise a little bit back towards Charles. It's super interesting the way the ground effect floors of the current sequence of cars works.
Well, with just over 10 minutes left of this one and only free practice session, Leclerc is sitting pretty at the top in front of the two McLarens, Piastri, Norris, Alonso and Sainz the top 5. And we talk about bringing upgrades, McLaren bringing upgrades incrementally, and every time they seem to work absolute wonders in a week where I think only their new wind tunnel just officially came online. You think, you've been doing these upgrades without this new wind tunnel? What can they achieve once that comes into play? Then we can go down to Rosanna and get a bit of a Lando Norris update.
It's like I turn and it's like the rear is just not connected to the car at all. It's like I've got zero accommodation.
So Albon is out there at the moment. That was his team radio for Williams, and he's been struggling and going off track quite a bit there. So he's not happy with how that Williams is operating right now. Let's head back down to Rosanna.
Zero accommodation, Harry. That gives me flashbacks to Japan and our trip to the Japanese Grand Prix a couple of weeks ago. But anyway, I digress. The sound you can hear is Lando Norris's McLaren being fired up, and the mechanics were working really quickly at the front of the car, working on the front suspension, making some changes. And as I look at the time ticking down with 9.5 minutes left on the clock, you got to hope they've gone in the right direction, because do not forget, the car's going to park firmly now. Both McLarens ready and raring to go. As Lewis Hamilton heads out on track, I think the track is going to get very busy now as everyone tries to use these last few minutes of our only practice session to dial themselves in ahead of qualifying to set the grid for Sunday's Grand Prix. Yeah,
and well, the lights have begun to come on as the sun has set in Qatar, and over 3,500 light bulbs suspended from 1,000 structures around this track, which illuminates this 5.4 kilometre, just over 3.3 mile circuit, the Losail International Circuit, and lots of drivers out there struggling, Alex, with these tricky conditions. And Albon actually was throwing his hands up in the cockpit. Zero accommodation.
Yeah, it's not one I've heard before, actually. Zero accommodation. I presume he means zero mechanical grip behind what he's trying to do in the car. Look how much, as we see George Russell walk the rear of that Mercedes into the first corner with kind of so much hesitancy in the way that he applies steering lock all out in the dust. But they're all out there, Harry, because even though these are difficult conditions, they're the best conditions that they can possibly get to simulate what will be the beginning of the relevant sessions, qualifying the race. And it's the best opportunity they'll have. That's why we're about to see a flurry of soft tyre running, perhaps. These last 10 minutes where, as we can see, the sun has fallen behind the horizon, and we're starting to get the darkness fall over the circuit here. These last few minutes are going to be the best of the session.
So essentially, they're getting about 7.5 minutes of practice time before they're locked in for the rest of the weekend.
No, not even that, because the circuit's still going to move forward so much, it's going to be irrelevant anyway in terms of the balance. But you get what you're given, and they're making the best of it.
The two Hasses are out there as well. They have made the switch onto the soft compounder tyre. Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg out there at the moment, but they're pretty much pinning their hopes at the moment in terms of competitiveness on a whole new car design and concept for the Austin Grand Prix next time around. But they'll be the first of the soft runners to come across the line, and Magnussen goes with a 1:29.5. That's enough to see him up to 11th, and this is the sound of his teammate Nico Hülkenberg. Rounds the final corner, tentatively applies the throttle up to 6th gear, into 7th gear, and across the line. It's a much better lap from Hülkenberg. It's second fastest for the German, just over half a tenth shy of Charles Leclerc's medium compound tyre as he eases off the throttle and pulls off to the right as he slows down into turn 1, and perhaps a wry smile from Gunther Steiner, the team principal, on the pit wall as he watches on. But soft running then commencing at least as much of it as they can. This is the sound of Kevin Magnussen coming through the left-hander as he then approaches the final corner, and just you can hear the sound of him running over the red and white curbing, and then the sparks fly, and you can see the dip in angle at the end of the curve, the 3 to 5 centimetre drop, the serrated edge as you described so well earlier, Alex, that they've got to be so careful of, because it can really be a floor killer.
Dragging the floor of the Haas across that outside curve. And we're seeing the cars start to plug into the racetrack now. Finally, they're generating some grip and some temperature. Fernando Alonso in his green Aston Martin making his way into the triple apex right-hander, which finishes the second sector as he moves into the third and final sector through the left-hander, where Kevin Magnussen bounced over the curbs a few moments ago. No such issue for Fernando Alonso. The front starting to look a little bit more poised, and the rear starting to look a little more settled. The soft compound tyre really helping drivers here, demonstrating where the circuit is still at. These are the laps then which are going to be the most reflective of what we're going to see later on in qualifying.
And Fernando Alonso going fastest with a 1:27.919 with less than 5 minutes to go now, and perhaps the most prospective running they'll get when it comes to the rest of the weekend. We'll of course have qualifying later on today, 6 o'clock on the BBC Sport website and app, and on 5 Sport Extra before, and tomorrow will be the sprint Saturday, the sprint shootout, followed by the sprint race, and then our Grand Prix on Sunday from 6 o'clock. This is the sound of Sergio Perez and his Red Bull as the times are coming thick and fast. The two Williams have gone 6th and 7th, Albon and Sargent, as Perez is currently coming through the middle sector now, and has found time in the first sector, but his teammate out there, Alex, is going mighty quick, fastest of anybody in the first sector.
20th and last place for Sergio Perez so far. He's one of the few drivers to, actually still both of the McLarens have yet to set their fastest lap of the session on anything other than the hard tyre. So a very important lap for Sergio Perez, who's on the red walled medium tyre and bouncing all over the curves through the penultimate turn, arcing his way now into the final turn, slightly wide of the apex for the Red Bull car of Perez. Let's see what he comes across the line on. It will be good enough for second place, so a bit more of a happy hunting ground, but here comes Verstappen.
But he's on a soft tyre and he's slower than Alonso on a medium, which is interesting. I'm going to come on to Alonso in a minute before we see Verstappen's lap finish.
Yeah, he comes around the final corner now. It's got a bit of Flovis paint on the right rear of his rear wing as the flap opens for DRS, and Verstappen finds almost half a second over Alonso, and on that soft compounded tyre, the Dutchman goes fastest with 3 minutes to go, a 1:27.428.
Stroke of Flovis, the paint, which demonstrates how the aerodynamics are working for the car on the rear of that Red Bull. Interesting to see that for such a dominant car at this stage of the season. The sound you're hearing is Lewis Hamilton as he weaves his way through the traffic and finds himself wide on the exit of the corner in the final part of the circuit. That's the third from last turn, isn't it, before he head through that left-hander.
And you could just hear the thud and the clatter as the floor of that Mercedes was scraping along the curb. And if you could hear that, think how it feels in the cockpit as well. And they must be grimacing when they hear that.
They really do. And what you need to do, as the Mercedes there crossing the pit entry white line on the way in, it'd be interesting to see if race control have anything to do with that. Normally you're not allowed to do that. You need to pit commit earlier than that was white Russell. Line. That was George Russell coming in. Verstappen, Alonso, Perez, Leclerc, Hulkenberg, the top five at the moment, with the two McLarens still yet to set a time on anything but the hard tyre.
Yeah, 2 minutes left to go. Leclerc starts a fast lap on his soft compounded tyres through turn one, the right-hander. Immediately you're sort of sucked into almost a bit like a toboggan run. It comes thick and fast at you, going left, going right, taking a little bit of curb. We get a little bit of a breather from turn 3 down to turn 4. No major braking points on this track, as actually Leclerc then comes through the right-hander of turn 4, gets out wide, comes through it all crossed over, kicks up the sparks, has to run over the red and and white curbing and losing a big chunk of time there. Leclerc once again falling off of the edge of the circuit in that Ferrari.
Andrew points out in the comm box a solid set of purple, fastest of all microsectors for Fernando Alonso at the start of his flying lap, but slightly cooling as he heads through the first sector.
So what I was going to say about Alonso was, remember his race here 2 years ago? He was absolutely outstanding in that Alpine. He finished on the podium, and he was ahead of Bottas in the Mercedes and Perez in the Red Bull even before Bottas had his problem with his puncture. I don't know how he managed to get an Alpine ahead of a Red Bull and a Mercedes, but there you are. And it was interesting when I went to his museum to interview him the following May. The trophy from that podium was in pride of place at the entry to the museum. So I think he was as impressed by his drive that day as I was. But I just wonder whether there's something about, I don't know, it's early days, so I just wonder whether there's something about Alonso and Qatar that clicks.
He was waxing lyrical about the circuit earlier on the weekend, saying it's these high-speed corners in a Formula One car that really get the adrenaline pumping. That's what he said. I think he seems to really enjoy the circuit here. It was indeed a tremendous drive as Yuki Tsunoda makes his way across the start-finish line and up to fourth.
Can you push from pit out all the way through to turn 4, please?
Why?
Just push, please. As best you can.
So that's Max Verstappen being told to push flat out from pit exit all the way to turn 4 by his engineer, Jean-Pierre Lambayeси, questioning that decision. Any inclination as to why that might be?
It will either be because that's a strategy they're using for tyre build into qualifying to try to, it's a big flat spot we can now see on the red Ferrari of Carlos Sainz, the left front. But it will either be because that's the strategy they're using to try to build the tyre into qualifying, or they want to see whether he's going to be under pressure if he stops in the race and how quickly the tyre can build up to temperature for those conditions. Generally a 2-stop race here in Qatar, so it's a very long pit lane as well, so they'll be balancing all of those factors. You've got to remember, this is not only the only session you can sort the car out in terms of its setup, but it's the only session to give you an inclination for the strategy in terms of which tyres you're going to run, when you're going to stop through the race, and how that's going to work out, beyond, of course, the information that they can get from the sprint race later in the weekend.
Yeah, it all gets locked in after this practice session, which has now counted down to 0 as Leclerc does get a cleaner lap in this time, but suffers, I think, from having to do it the second time round on that soft compound of tyre. Goes third fastest behind his teammate Carlos Sainz. Russell comes across the line. They were on the medium compound of tyre, though. He goes up to 8th, and that just about does it then for free practice 1. That's all you get before we now head into qualifying for Sunday's Grand Prix. And Max Verstappen then at the end of free practice 1 is fastest, having survived the slips and the slides from this tricky resurfaced Qatar circuit. He's fastest in front of Sainz, Leclerc, Alonso and Perez, the top 5, Tsunoda, Hülkenberg, Russell, Piastri, Norris, the top 10, Sargent, Albon, Hamilton, Stroll, Ocon, the top 15, Gasly, Bottas, Zhou, Lawson and Magnussen, the 20 drivers.
Thank you very much, Harry. So Max Verstappen on top, starting things as I'm sure he means to go on this weekend. He's pretty much nailed on, isn't he, really, for, is it just pole position later on for the Grand Prix on Sunday? Is it the sprint shootout he's going to get tomorrow ahead of the sprint race as well, and then take his third title? So much up for grabs for Max Verstappen this weekend. But Ferrari slotting into P2 and P3, we'd slightly billed McLaren as the ones to watch. So, Harry, are you surprised?
Yes and no. I mean, it's very difficult to kind of get a pinpoint on what we've just seen because it's been an hour of unrepresentative track time running till the very end, and just how dusty and sandy and slippery this track is. We've seen Leclerc going off on pretty much nearly every single lap he's tried to do, so I'm going to cop out and sit on the fence and go, I haven't got quite a good read on it yet.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a difficult session, wasn't it? Everybody doing as much as they could. Not huge action, I would say. Little slips and slides here and there because of the conditions. No one sort of making driver error, as it were. But what do you do now, Alex? You've got a bit of time before qualifying. You can't then touch the car. It goes into Parc Fermé. So this is quite an important couple of hours right now.
you try desperately to make a decision based around all of your best extrapolations of everything you've got through the season. Similar racetracks, similar scenarios, similar levels of grip and mew and aerodynamics, along with all of the data that you've just managed to gather. You put that all together and make I think it was a Max Verstappen earlier on in the weekend who said best guess at the end of free practice to try and put a car together for qualifying in the 2 races.
But I think that's quite exciting. It's probably going to mean we have a mixed up grid for qualifying for the sprint tomorrow and for the grid on Sunday. So in a way, we're quite lucky, aren't we? 1 practice session. I know you said almost no practice sessions, Brundle, but quite nice to see the drivers being pushed to the limit.
And they really are being pushed to the limit around what is an extremely, extremely low grip surface here. And I think it's a low grip surface. Well, I know it's a low grip surface because nothing else is going to run that will stay for qualifying. Expect to see a lot of laps lost to track limits on the exit of turn 10, on the exit of turn 4, and if that wind sticks around, problems early in the lap as well. It's going to be really exciting, a curveball for Max Verstappen to try to wrap his championship up with.
Yeah, lots to look out for. Qualifying coming your way at 5 to 6. You can listen to us on BBC Radio 5 Sports Extra. My thanks to Andrew Benson, the BBC's chief F1 writer, racing driver Alex Brundle up in the commentary box alongside our lead commentator Harry Benjamin. And I'm back in the paddock. It is a little cooler. The lights have come on and we've got a couple of hours now until qualifying gets underway to set the grid for the Grand Prix on Sunday. Of course, the Qatar Grand Prix on Sunday, but tomorrow it's all about the sprint. So a bit of a confusing one to get your head around, but it's a sprint weekend, which means the drivers are pushed to the limits, perhaps a little more than usual. Join us later at 5 to 6 for qualifying. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.